Welcome to Town Council and Planning Commission Joint Work Session, Town of Cave Creek, Arizona, Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. The meeting is now called to order. Terry Mosley, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and
to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to take a silent roll call, and I believe Steve Breckner is on the line. Is Steve on?
Oh.
Okay, we're waiting Steve. So we want to text him. So I've got a little talk written here. This is the first, as far as I know, this is the first meeting of this kind. Maybe it's some of the old timers. Sorry, Tom. Yeah, it's written to Ernie. Yeah. It's up to get the planning set portion of the town's business, which is relatively small, $56 million budget this year. And the planning portion of that financially is very small, but it is probably the thing that draws the most interest in town because of the changes that go on and everybody's natural reluctance to see change. Just want to go over a little bit about tonight about the agenda. First thing is we're going to have a legal orientation that's going to be brief to kind of set the stage. And we're going to have comments by the commission. Any commissioner that wants to say a few words, we will do at that time. We'll have council comments with same thing. We're going to try to keep this meeting down to 2 hours if possible. And with 15 people and 20 items, and it's going to be a challenge to make this productive and keep it moving along. And after item 3, we'll have public comment on the proceedings here, so the public can weigh in on what they've heard and what they would like to see. This is a planning session at the request of Council Members Rhodes and Elkema on the planning and zoning codes, including the Planning Commission. And we really seek input from the volunteers, both commission and council, because this is a volunteer-driven town who recommend and approve zoning and subdivision code issues. I invite active participation. I hope everybody today will find something to talk about at some point here. We'd like everybody to weigh in and to feel comfortable doing so. One of the main issue is staff has gone out and asked both the Planning Commission and the council for items that they wish to see changed in the planning, mostly the planning and zoning, the zoning code and the subdivision code. And so they have brought this list down to those major categories you see on the easel there to the west. And we want to organize that so that the real outcome of the meeting, the deliverable of this meeting, is to give direction to the Planning Commission for where we want the town to go from the elected officials to the appointed officials. And 2 hours is an ambitious goal. I want to make a special point, though. Today is really not a do or die. This does not supplant any of the normal procedures. There are no decisions, no actual items being taken today. This is to orient planning so they can put together a program that can come back for approval. And what's going to come back is a plan with dates and schedules and any resources needed to make any changes that are by consensus today. And then that will have to be approved through the normal channels. So there are no real decisions, but we're passing information and setting priorities for the preparation of that plan. Legal is here today to set the stage and hopefully keep us out of trouble. I especially caution all officials, appointed and elected, to steer clear of subjects that are current or may be upcoming. They're not on the agenda today. This is for planning and zoning and the code. This is a legal process. We're being televised, we're being recorded, and no one wants the comments to hurt the town in a court case down the road. And in my experience, planning is the area of the town business that generates the most legal issues. The next steps after this meeting, the deliverable, as I said, is a prioritized list of proposed changes that goes to staff to guide them in what they do next. Staff creates an execution plan. That plan is then furnished for comment for council, for the planning commission. At the approval level, council approves or modifies the plan, it puts it on, and we schedule agendas and the resources for the actual changes to be made through the vote of the council. So it's a first step of many that finally comes up with an actual change to the zoning or the subdivision codes. We've got 20 people and dozens of items, so it's going to be a challenge. I guess I said that already. The other thing is we have pads of paper in front of the commission and council members that if there is an item that is that has come up since, or some of the items are so broad that I can't figure out what they mean, we may have to have someone who came up with that item to put a little substance on it so we can understand what it is sufficient, prioritizing. With that, I'm going to move into the legal session of the agenda, which is item number 2, review of the roles, responsibility of town council, planning commission, and staff as defined by ARS Title 19 Town Code and the zoning ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, Chairman Reckner, members of the commission and members of the council. I'm here as your town attorney, and I also am through the risk pool. I advise all 77 cities and towns on land use. They can call me. Kristen is here, my partner, because she is the one who has to litigate when cities and towns screw up. I must tell you though, when this was scheduled, it conflicts with both a medical appointment that I had and a council meeting I have with a different council on Tuesdays. And so I had to juggle my medical appointment and my council meeting will start at 6:30. So I'm going to go out to the car and call in. So you only got me till 6:30. What I'm going to outline for you is why it's important for the three elements of the town who are here that are responsible for land use entitlement. 3 elements are the council, the commission, and staff. You only have power because the state legislature gave you power. Your rights under the zoning code are derived from the state and they can take them away. And you may recall that our mayor, in effect, spoke quite eloquently when he was asking for support to help the league sort of respond to actions by the legislature, who, when they responded, not so much for what you were doing, but other cities and towns adopt strategies that bar development. And there was attempts to, in effect, deny you the ability to zone. And they have the power to do that. And so one goal tonight is to tell all 3 of you, the staff, the commission, and the council, 3 good reasons why you need to figure out a way to work together. One is so that you don't absolutely bar development like other cities and towns and encourage legislators to deny you the ability to zone. Secondly, you have insurance coverage for this. But if you do something that's expressly contrary to statute, you could lose coverage. And Kristen won't be able to, well, she might be able to defend you. She won't be able to have the pool to indemnify you. And so the right answer is to make sure you try to follow the rules. And the third is if we can't figure out a way to adopt rules like you've done for sober living and like we're trying to do for short-term rentals, you could end up with unregulated uses in your community. And the one element of Cave Creek is how attractive it is. One reason that the commission was able to unanimously propose sober living regulations was that Prescott was exporting all of their sober living homes to you. And you had attractive residences with upscale sober living trying to have such enterprises. And so those are 3 good reasons why we need to figure out a way to work together. Now, Kristen is going to quote from your zoning code as to what your powers are.
Good evening. Okay, so the current zoning ordinance very carefully lists the purpose and the scope of the zoning ordinance, as well as and the subdivision ordinance addresses the purpose and scope of the subdivision code. But I just want to point out that the purpose and scope of, what's listed in the ordinance is dictated by statute. And so that's in Title IX. There's one chapter on planning, one chapter on zoning, and one chapter on subdivision. And so those form kind of the overall universe of what you can do within each of those types of categories, planning being more the general plan, zoning and subdivision. So your zoning ordinance, following from what you're permitted as a municipality to do for zoning. The purpose and scope of zoning is to promote the public health and safety first and foremost, and the general welfare of the citizens of the town. This is really key, provide the minimum requirements for implementation of the vision, goals, objectives outlined and adopted in your general plan. Guide and manage, regulate future growth and development, protect private property rights, preserve the character of the town, and ensure financial stability of the town. So those are derived then from the statutory authority. For the subdivision ordinance, which is derived from another chapter in the statutes, the purpose and scope is to provide for the orderly growth and harmonious development of the town, keeping with diverse lifestyle, rural character, and sensitive environment, foster preservation of the natural environment and habitat, ensure adequate traffic circulation through coordinated street systems with relation to major thoroughfares, adjoining subdivisions, and public facilities, secure adequate provisions for water supply, drainage, sanitary sewage, other health requirements, consider reservation of adequate sites for schools, recreation, trail system, and other public facilities, promote the conveyance of land by accurate legal description, and provide procedures for the achievement of all of those purposes. So the general plan outlines the vision and goals. The zoning regulates the use of the land and certain other requirements like setbacks and off-street parking. And then subdivision code addresses the more specific planning pieces. And then, as Bill mentioned, the Planning Commission is, in addition to the council and the staff, one arm of that is permitted by the statute to have. So Title IX provides that you may have a planning agency, they call it in the statute. So here, the commission primarily advises the town council on planning, zoning policies, plans, amendments, regulations as authorized by Title IX and the ARS. And then the Title IX, Section 461 outlines what the planning agency shall do, includes develop and then maintain a general plan, develop specific plans as may be necessary to implement the general plan, periodically review capital improvement program, and perform other planning functions as the legislative body may provide. So that's in 9-46101. And then planning agency may also have additional review if there are conditional uses under statute. Says if there's conditional uses, you may require site plan review and approval by a planning commission. And then another statute dictates whether the planning commission or a hearing officer may hold public hearings on the zoning ordinances. So that's what, one of the primary functions of the planning commission, to hold those public hearings and then provide the recommendations. And then one other item on the agenda to talk about is the difference between a variance and an exception. And a variance is defined by state law, and a variance is a deviation from a zoning regulation. An exception is defined in your subdivision ordinance, and it's a deviation from your subdivision code requirements. So they're very separate things. And the variance applies in statute, has very specific requirements. It may only be granted based on the property and not a self-imposed condition on the property, being size, shape, topography, location, or surroundings. So those are some factors that the court will require. So if a variance is granted that doesn't satisfy those, the courts will overturn those. Exceptions are different. Those requirements are set forth in the subdivision code. And so it's the Board of Adjustment that will be able to, that is authorized by statute 9-46206 to grant variances. But in granting any variances, they may not make any changes to use permitted. So you can't say you want to operate, I want a variance to be able to operate a commercial, business in a residential zone. That's not appropriate use of a variance. It would be like in the case Pond First is a relatively recent variance case that the Arizona Supreme Court upheld. And in that case, it was a variance that was approved from a 500-yard setback due in part to several eminent domain proceedings that had impacted the size of the property in a commercial zone. So Pond First wanted to operate the pawn shop, but they needed less of a front yard setback just due to the size of the property. And so it wasn't, the pawn shop use was permitted, but they needed, in order to be able to operate a business or any business, needed a variance from that. And the court found that that was an acceptable use. But courts have found that adding a third story, a residential addition, having a larger sign and a house color, those are not appropriate for variances. So. And then your subdivision code is the exceptions are the process is listed in chapter 1.2C. And you're probably all very familiar with this, but I'll just run through them. You have to request an exception. Each exception requires a separate application, and then requests for exemptions will be made subject to, of course, a public hearing process through the commission, recommendations forwarded to the council. And then those recommendations, similar considerations to variance, but not constrained quite so much by the case law, are based on extraordinary conditions of topography, land ownership, adjacent development, and other circumstances not provided for in the subdivision ordinance. And exceptions are considered and decided before a determination of a final approval of a preliminary or final plat, and then will be noted on the final plat. So it's very clear what rules apply to that property based on the plat. And then just wanted to go over kind of that administrative process. How do you get to there? And so when someone files an application for, a zoning or for a preliminary plat, that application is received, then the town is required to process that, and under whatever zoning code, plat, the subdivision ordinance, and based on those criteria set forth. And then the staff is limited to the language of the code. They can't make deviations from the code. And so if the language in the code or an ordinance is too precise, then you'll have very discrete objective criteria. Then the staff can either approve or deny with, and then the council, when you make a decision, would have little discretion in those cases. But if they're more subjective or open-ended type of requirements, then that adds some discretion in, but also adds some challenge that, a due process challenge that, depending on how that discretion is exercised, could lead to dispute, and has led to dispute in many cases. So that's kind of how that, I guess, how those kind of discretionary acts can play out in your code. So then the language of the code, though, is up to the council.
We will be quiet. Summing up what she just told you, provide you context as you try to work through the 20 some odd items on page 3. She walked you through the 3 elements of the decision process: the commission, the council, and staff. You need to realize that your discretion changes as you ratchet down from the council. You are the elected officials. The voters voted you in. You have almost absolute discretion when exercising your zoning powers. There's a case out of Marana that is quoted nationwide. It says, as long as you don't shock the conscience, you're not liable. And that's why the voters selected you. Now, sadly, we have some cities that do shock the conscience. Thankfully, you're not one of them. And so the first is you have absolute discretion at the highest level. That's where you can exercise. When you ratchet down from that level, down to the commission, down to staff, as you start applying things like site plan, special use permits, CUPs, you then have criteria and variances through the Board of Adjustment, where if you don't meet those criteria under the state statute, you could be liable. So your greatest discretion is zoning. Your lowest discretion is when you get down to actions that are recommendations by the commission to the council, like site plan, like plats, like special use permits. Then you have criteria you have to satisfy, objective criteria.
Thank you very much. On a sad note, I forgot to make this announcement. It's not an announcement I really want to make, but we had a death on Black Mountain this morning. That is, by my count, the third death on trails in Cave Creek in the last 12 months. So sad news. The next thing on the agenda tonight are the town council comments. And so I'd open it up to anyone on tail. Let's just start on the left here and go around the table if anyone has anything they'd like to say.
I'd like to say thank you all for coming, and I feel awkward that our backs are to you. It's unfortunate that the room has to be laid out this way to accommodate everybody around the table. But we want to emphasize that we have all of your highest respect, and we are glad that you're here.
Ernie?
Well, I always take the gunfighter position when I'm in a restaurant, so I'm not really comfortable sitting here with my back to everybody. I'm going to let you know. I think this is a good opportunity for us to work together and try and see what everybody's vision is and make whatever changes that need to be made within the constraints of the law.
Councilmember McGuire.
Wonderful to see the commission, council members here, the audience. When I came into the council, I'm not going to say how many years ago it would be. It was emphasized that there are processes, and within our responsibility, it's been my experience that when we follow the process, we do well. If we deviate from the process, then sometimes we need to come back. But the processes of town government work, and I look forward to working with all of you through those processes.
Thank you. Councilman Rhodes.
I appreciate everybody showing up in the audience, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity to talk to the planning commission. I took the liberty of being prepared. So if you could take one and pass one down. And same thing on this side. These are kind of my thoughts on what needs to happen and kinds of things we need to start looking at. We have some big stuff we have some big stuff coming, and we need to be prepared for it. And if we're not prepared for it, it's going to come back and bite us, particularly with the state land trust as they build the chip plant. No, wrong one. No, that one's supposed to stay with me. Sorry.
If there's any extra,
Yeah, the audience.
pass them to
could
the
use it.
audience.
I think yeah.
And we have some nice to share if you've got this.
If you guys want to take a look, it's just kind of my thoughts and the kinds of things we ought to be taking a look at. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. I skimmed the first few. There's some good ones on there. Councilmember Elkema.
Thanks, and I too really appreciate this opportunity to talk, and I appreciate that citizens care enough to be here, because we hear from you, and it's appreciated. So I guess what I want to say is, first of all, I view that the current commission appointees as a great collection of community minds. You all are here in the right place and at the right time, and I truly hope you notice and understand the scope of the work you're charged with. Zoning ordinance, chapter 14.1b, and I've got it in quotes. It says, and shall advise the council regarding applications for amendments to the general plan, specific area plans, and this ordinance. That's a big job. There's a lot that goes on in the chamber with the council. So the advice I'm looking for is a complete review of our ordinances and an update of the ordinance system. There are 3 tools that are identified for your use: the general plan voted in place by the citizens. Thank you. It's listed first. We know it's not a law, but we also know that citizens were actively involved in its description of what they desire for this place where we live. Ordinances are the laws that keep us safe and, when adhered to serve in fairness to everyone. Any new ordinances must conform to the general plan. General plan does not change zoning. That's up to the commission to suggest to the council through ordinance review and revision. Ordinance revision conforming to the current general plan is required. The general plan does make recommendations to the town decision makers regarding the existing quality of life, lifestyles enjoyed by the residents of Cave Creek. And there's a public process for guiding preservation and growth through the understanding and efforts of the citizens, the commission, and the council. Thank you.
Okay, let's see, Councilmember Ogden.
Nothing right now, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Is Steve Rickner gotten online?
Yes.
He is. I'm just going to go through as it hears now. So Steve, if you're out there, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Happy to be here. Thanks for everybody getting together. I'm happy to help the town in any way I can, as well as all the fellow commission members. I appreciate what Councilman Alcama just said. And I have some thoughts to share in that regard whenever appropriate this evening. So.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Vice Chair Driscoll.
Being on the planning commission has been a learning experience. I've learned a lot the first year, and we have yet to have an active meeting this year, but look forward to learning more and understanding the variances and details that arrive with each case that comes before the commission. I think there's room for both old and new in Cave Creek, that we have a past with a lot of respect and a lot of passion, but we also have a future with a lot of opportunity. So I look forward to being able to contribute to that and continue the discussions.
Commissioner Lamar.
I kind of adhere to the saying the devil's in the details, so I'll wait till we hear, if we hear any details about the general request for recommendation. And
Okay.
guidance.
Mr. Miller, I do not see him. Oh, he's online.
Yes, can you hear me? I'm here.
Sure can.
Apologies, I couldn't make it. Nothing, to mention or note as of yet, but I'm here listening along and happy to comment.
Thank you. Commissioner Silva.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I've worn many hats in the town. And after, reading the agenda and getting Councilman Alcama's and Rhodes, comments, I think the group needs to look at the availability of time as it relates to applying to each of these items. And by that, I think one needs to prioritize these items. And I think we need to look at, as we prioritize these items, look at the ultimate effect it's going to have on those properties. As an example, there's X number of properties equaling X number of acres in our town core, and there is no more. And in our main business area, i.e. Cave Creek Road and Carefree Highway, the same exists for commercial. There's only a limited number of properties Residential, I think it's much wider. It's a broader type situation there. But I wouldn't like to see us spending staff time and our time collectively on items that are so small and insignificant that they'll have little to no effect on the properties that may be affected by them. I think we need to look at those properties and areas that what we're going to discuss today will have the greatest effect and the broadest brush. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Spitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's refreshing to be here and I find it interesting that the town is being more preventative than reactionary in dealing with these kind of problems.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone?
Yes.
Oh, Bob, I'm sorry. He's right. You're not there next to me. No wonder I missed you.
First of all,
Sorry
Mr.
about
Mayor, I want to thank you and the council for bringing us all together. I think we have, 14 people who are invested in this town. We love this town and we want to make sure and ensure everything we can do to make sure it's a beautiful place to live today and into the future. Our priorities obviously have to be things to make sure that the town can survive. It's fiscal health. Water is a huge issue. We have to protect that. Protection from fire, the safety of our people. And I think those are probably the top things that we need to worry about, and then maintaining the other infrastructure in the town. But I think that this is an opportunity for people to express themselves and hopefully prioritize things within the budget and our ability. I mean, we're still a small town, but I think it's got great potential, and with all of us working together, I think that we'll succeed.
Thank you. Well said. My comment is, I really like the aspects about we're here for the good of the town. I mean, that is our charge, is to do things that are for the best interest of the town, and compromise if that's appropriate in the best interest of the town. We are here today to do exactly the prioritization. Because staff needs direction, both because we don't have infinite staff and we want to get the biggest bang for the buck, the top thing done first, and then second, and have it laid out from top to bottom so that we see early progress and steady progress both. We have funds. The town, in my view, one of the shining successes of the town, I can count two shining successes. One is Spur Cross. That's amazing. And the second is that we have the ability financially to support something. A town of 5,000 can support the kind of open space that we support and the kind of amenities that we have in the natural environment. My only other comment is on discretion. I am not a fan of discretion. I think discretion leads to one deal for one person and a different deal for somebody else. In its best application, and its worse, it leads to corruption, because now someone has the ability to, hey, I have the ability to do something for me. What do I get for it? So this town is really clean. Our state is, in my view, is clean too. And I just hope that we can do our thinking on the zoning and planning so that we don't have uprising every time we make a decision. That the good thinking goes into crafting good regulations, good code, and that does its job in helping to bring the community together rather than dividing us when something comes up. With that, I think we'll move on to the next stage, and I'll describe a little bit the process here. It's organized in an attempt to get to the solution, which is the deliverable, if you recall from earlier, is we want to give clear direction to the staff so they can create a plan of the top priority items. If you'll notice on the back of the room there, we have front of the room, we have 3 different easels. And those are the 3 buckets that we hope to put the items into. One is the critical impact. And that would be defined as something that is, it's upon us right now. It's something that is very, very needed, it's popular, it's cleaning up something that has been a long-term problem that we really need to put near the top of the list. The second one, this kind of the second wave is a longer term. The critical impact, we plan to hand to staff after tonight and say, okay, go out and create a plan. The plan includes resources, timing, personnel, and things like that. Time is probably the toughest one, but because we have the resources to do these things. But that's the one that will go in there first and come back with the prioritized critical impact items early rather than late. It's still going to be a couple months probably before we get that back. It's got to be reviewed, and then council will approve that. We'll agendize that and approve or modify that particular document. Then it goes to staff for execution with reporting, so that if we start to fall off the plan, we can decide to relax the deadlines, or we can put more resources on it or funds, try to break through any barriers that happen to crop up. The second one there is the longer term. The second wave are items that, hey, we'd like to get these done, but they're lower priority. And they're not the ones we're going to focus on early because of timing, impact, finances, drought. There's some things that are critically important. Others can wait a while. The last one there is further investigation. And those are the kind of the remaining items. And I really hope to have no more than 10 items on the critical impact side so that we can get to work and get those done and get started. The more items on there, the slower it's going to be. And so there's always a number one project, and there's a project at the end. I don't know if we have time to get into all that detail today, but we really want to get those critical projects rolling out the door as quick as we can. So here we are. We'll start by taking and I encourage you, like Dusty, you have a list of items on here. I encourage you to the items that are appropriate for action. Some of these are really not action items, they're more investigative. Well, the investigative items would go in three probably, or
Yeah, there's two that I think would be critical, and the rest would be longer.
why don't you write those up and then and go ahead and stick them on the critical. And if other people have things that they think are critical items that weren't turned in originally, I'd encourage you to write those down, and let's just go ahead and put put it on a sticky. Yeah, put it on a sticky so we can move the stickies, because at some point, if this goes like every other session I've been in, everything will be on the critical one. And we'll have to have a challenge session, see if we can move some things into the number 2 priority. No, let's get started with this. We need to do it in parallel so we save time. Yeah.
Want to start going through the agenda?
Okay. Yep. We're on the agenda. Yeah. Thank you. The first item here is commercial buffer zoning district and possibly renaming it to intermediate commercial. So pull that one off and walk over there. And so do we have any proposals? I mean, how important does that seem to people? Speak up.
I have a comment, and it's this. 6 years on the planning commission. And that commission has worked smoothly, and as the gears all mesh, and most of it makes sense until it comes to commercial buffer. And what I was taught about commercial buffer was that that's sort of a utility zoning classification, and we use it when we don't know what else to say. And the truth is, for both a business owner who comes to town ready to invest and a residential owner who has proximity to a commercial zone, they both have expectations that they're going to be treated fairly. But when you pop commercial buffer on it, nobody gets satisfaction with it. There's no buffering really, and it's really all on the commercial side. That's just my opinion. but that's what I think I've observed.
Which of those three categories does that put it in?
I'd love to see that as critical,
Okay.
like you said, Bob.
Yeah, and we're, we do need summaries of what these are. 'Cause some of these are not really understandable. Land use, and here we hit one right away. That's, whose item was that?
Mr. Mayor,
Good.
I had a comment about the term commercial buffer. We discussed this in the past, and I think that it has significant meaning to the residences. When we use the term intermediate commercial, that to me says it's just commercial, that it could be anything. And that suggests that, is there a low commercial too? What's high commercial? We don't know exactly what that is. But by saying buffer, it says this is an area that's adjacent to a different type of zone, a residential zone. And I think it's important that we keep that concept. We don't have that many interfaces in this town. And for me, as kind of a new resident, it's more important to me to have this distinction. And I think it's important to people around me that I've talked to maintain that term commercial buffer. And as far as how critical it is, I don't think it's terribly critical. I think that we have certain provisions in our codes right now to kind of cover it. So I wouldn't put it as super critical, but maybe longer term. my
Okay,
opinion.
okay, well, where's it at?
Right now.
Okay, well, we'll come to that a little bit later, because that's the kind of interplay we want to try to see where these things land. And no one's gonna get everything they want. I mean, I have items on this list I've been trying to get done for 5 years. So,
Bob,
yes, go ahead, Steve.
sorry, I raised my hand. I was told to raise my hand, but it didn't seem to work, so.
We missed it, Steve.
I'll lower it, just to comment on this issue. It was something, the issue related to commercial buffer and intermediate commercial. It was initially something that was tacked on to site plan reviews, but it never, I don't believe it got addressed at the second reading, because the site planning commission was turned down by the council, and this was tacked onto it. And it was really tacked on at my behest, because I feel that the name commercial buffer is a misnomer, and it causes a little bit of angst amongst residents, because they don't understand it, because they're taking the word buffer at face value. And that's the issue here. For me, I understand, I'll look at the commercial buffer, what are the allowed uses, everything that's involved with it. We can call it whatever we want, and I'm still going to look at the actual substance. So this is only in name only, and only for purposes of trying to dissuade misconceptions by our residents. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So we'll leave it, I'm not sure where that puts on the priority, but we'll leave it there until we get everything, all the stickies on the board, and then we'll start shuffling the cards. So the next one on here is the DR 43 as it pertains to large animals on smaller properties. I believe that's the one where there are, well, DR 43 is a pretty good sized property. Well, not really. Yeah, yeah, that's 1 acre. That's where all these animals on 1 acre. Yeah.
Why can't we have two horses to be at 1 acre? I think that's what the genesis.
Well, I think you get more than two. You can't you have
The ordinance says one right now.
one.
So what they were asking is, can we have a second animal? And I think that's all that is.
Okay, so let's put that up there. And we're not looking to solve the problems today or debate them out, other than to understand them and get them up here, or which ones are critical. I'm going to say that one is not a critical issue. Does anybody disagree with that?
Medium term.
I mean, maybe something needs to be solved, but I'd put that number 2 there.
It's longer.
Yeah, and again, if we have disagreement, we can move that back and forth.
Mayor Morris?
Yes.
Yeah, just to comment on that issue, I think part of the consideration is when you read the zoning ordinance, it defines private ranch as 2 acres or more. And then it goes on to describe how many large animals and small animals you can have on a private ranch.
Mhm.
But it doesn't break it down further to the DR 70 and the DR 43. And so there's, I think, some confusion about people trying to interpret. what that zoning ordinance actually says.
Yeah.
Right, needs to be clarified.
That's a great example. And probably an easy kill. It sounds like something that can be taken care of reasonably quick.
If you weren't here for the horse wars, you don't.
Cynthia, I would say that, there are DR 43 properties that aren't 1 acre that are more than one. But if, when I read this on the agenda, I was wondering if the goal was to change 2 acre to 1 acre. Because that's the only thing I can make of it.
Okay, well, we'll delegate that wrestling with those questions to staff in the interest of, so you'll have to, Luke, you'll have to wrestle these differing issues down, come up with a consensus, and then if we can't get agreement, it goes to council, it goes to the planning commission, it goes to council, we vote and we're done with it. So that's the decision-making process in democracies. Zoning enforcement.
I don't know who put it up, but I'd like to know. Give me some specificity on that. I don't know. Zoning enforcement.
Here comes some
Does that
specificity.
mean you don't want to have enforcement by complaint, or you're gonna have proactive patrols and enforcement of zoning ordinances? Is that?
I
what
put,
it is?
I put this on and the reason I put it on is that in discussions with people who have watched our work,
Who's what, council's work?
council and commission work. The discussion kind of centers on the idea that, okay, we get a site plan, we work it, we then are ready to recommend it, it comes to the council, and the council approves it. And then in the language, and this is the part that was critical to what I heard, in the language, it says, and this is all well and good, unless something comes up and the zoning administrator decides to change it. That's where the rub came. So that's what this is about. If we agree to something, we make recommendations, we should stick with that.
I think that when we had the discussion, that was at the offsite. It was more along the lines, as I recall correctly, if I recall correctly, I think it was more along the lines of, if there's got to be some kind of modification, it needs to come back through the planning commission or the council for final approval. It should be, if there's going to be an exception, or there's going to be a change, or there's going to be a modification, it needs to go back. And I think that's one of the things we voted on that second meeting that I attended back in January, that we all voted saying that we wanted.
Yeah, when I read this, I read enforcement of zoning regulation. I remember a policeman going around enforcing
Right.
Yeah, I don't think-
regulations,
I-
not
I
an
didn't-
administrative
that's not my
decision.
intent.
Okay.
All that. I think the discussion we had was along those lines, along the lines of, after the plan is approved, if there's any changes to the plan, it needs to come back to the plan. If there are any.
After what plan is approved?
And what plan?
Say somebody gets a rezone or does something. Once it's approved by the council, there shouldn't be any changes made, or once it gets approved by the planning commission, there shouldn't be any changes made unless it goes back to the planning commission to approve those changes.
I'm not aware of anything that has ever happened that's not, and that, is that happening?
Isn't
You
that
had an
covered by the
example?
permitting process?
Right. Mr. Mayor, the only changes would be in the field of engineering. Water, sewer, storm sewer, curb, gutters, streets. Whenever you're putting in that type of infrastructure, there's always changes made in the field. And it's what they call a red line plan that the town is aware of, because an official from the town is there, as well as a developer builder, and it comes into the town. But I don't believe the intent is to have things like that go back to the plan commission or the town council, and there shouldn't be any changes in the way of ordinances or the subdivision, ordinances. That's pretty
No,
well
I mean,
cast in concrete.
I mean, no one in town, no one on earth has the ability, the authority to change a decision of the council,
Right.
unless it's court after adjudication. So, Steve's hand is up. I wish the audio didn't work and tell me what that happened. Watch that for us.
Yeah, I was gonna add, this doesn't sound like anything related to zoning enforcement. That would be, where someone has a property and they're making use of it that's not permitted, by the zone that it's in. And when we make a decision on a zone change, and it's granted, that person then can make use of their land within that zone, and then they go through their permitting process. I think the only, where we run into an issue for zoning enforcement is when you have an owner of a property that is, it's already improved, because during construction, staff and inspections are taking place, and one of them is zoning compliance. So, for enforcement, that would be something I see as related to existing improved properties that are making use of their property in violation of what's authorized within their zone. Now, if that's not what we're looking to do here, I don't know what we're really talking about.
Yeah, I don't either. Now we have maybe 3 different definitions on the table right now.
So Councilmember Rhodes, are you referring to a situation where there would be a rezoning, let's say from DR 43 to a commercial buffer, then that property owner would then sell it and a different site plan would be submitted. So it's not the intended use that the zoning change
That
was
is correct.
anticipating.
That is
So
correct.
that's the
that should
circumstance.
Come back
Okay.
for a second bite because you're changing the use.
But as it exists now, once the zoning has changed with the parcel, that zoning stays with the parcel, regardless if it's built on or if it's sold and redeveloped as something else in that allowance.
So that's not how it's happening right now.
Dusty, once you rezone it to commercial buffer, and that has a number of uses on it,
Understand?
control is the only time you can change that is to put stipulations on it and restrictions at the time it's approved. Once it's out there, that's a property right.
I think what we were talking about,
Actually, we can do conditional zoning. We
Yeah.
can give them a time period. And if the project's not done to the site plan, we can roll the zoning back to whatever it was previously. They've lost that right by not doing their project in a timely fashion. And that's a legal tool that we can use. So
And we
that's to solve the issue that you're
but I think
talking
that's
about.
what we were talking about
Yeah.
when we were at the offsite way back when. What we were talking about is somebody gets something rezoned and then they decide, and they come in and say, okay, I want to build X. And then they come back and immediately sell the property and say, okay, we're going to build Y instead. Even though it's been rezoned and even though it's been doing that, there's some concern that that's happened in the past.
Well, I'm not, well, I mean, that's what you described is the legal, normal, everyday situation.
And I think what we're talking about policing it up though, Bob, is if it's not going to, we give it a conditional approval for whatever X is.
Who's we?
Mayor, there's
Council.
another planning commissioner, is it Miller that?
So you all agree that that is a.
It's
You guys already-
Speak into the microphone there, Steve.
I'm sorry. Have you got-
Okay.
We,
If I could,
concern of council, I thought it was a concern of Mr. Rhodes.
if I could address, Councilman Rhodes, because I think he brings up a good point.
This is something we wanted to talk about, so
Okay.
that's what we're doing.
Okay, good.
But
If I-
we can remedy that by going with conditional zoning and
Okay,
putting a stipulation on it.
Order, let's one at a time and let's address the situation. Okay, so who's, Steve Lamar, you had the floor and chaos ensued, so.
If there is a problem, that problem can be
You have
solved.
to speak into your microphone, Steve.
That problem can be solved on the front end by, if you want to make sure that this particular use that's allowed in this zoning that you're rezoning to
is the only particular use, then you can grant the rezoning with a condition on it. And that has happened before from 1986 on.
Yeah.
Okay, here. And
I agree with
been
you. I
on
fully
the
agree.
Planning Commission off and on and on council since then.
And we've done that
But
last 4
that's
years.
like half it. But once it's rezoned, any use in that zone, in that rezoning is a right. You're right.
Mhm.
You can't limit it then and tell them, oh, they can't do something within that zoning, or you got a litigation and you're gonna lose.
You can do it though as a conditional, right?
Yeah, but that's the key.
Yeah.
That is a discretion, and is a discretionary act of the council to approve a condition under that. So it can be done today.
I think that's what we were talking about back in the offsite. When we,
Well,
back when.
We have that power today. We've exercised that power in the past. I've been on votes where we have restricted, for example, commercial buffer down to one use for a limited period of time to one owner even. So I think that's council has that discretion. You could make a motion and do that on any case that comes up.
Okay.
Okay, who was next on? Steve Breckner.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why'd we lose?
I tried my video, but apparently it's being blocked. I think what Councilman Rhodes brings up is a good issue to talk about. And, in regard to putting conditions on, rezoned applications, we just did that for 2 parcels in Area 18 that were sent to council, where the Planning Commission placed restrictions on them. And I want to make it clear, anytime, at least for me, when an applicant comes forward with a rezoning request, I'm not really concerned about whatever song and dance that applicant is pitching as their intended use for that property. I'm going to be looking at all the available uses within that zone that could be allowed if the property is rezoned, and then try to make a decision as to what's appropriate. And that's what was done in those 2 parcels in Area 18 that was recently sent. And I just think the council should probably do the same thing. Even if the Planning Commission were to approve a rezone application without conditions, if the council felt, no, I don't think every use within section 3.5 of our zoning ordinance is appropriate and want to restrict it, that's our chance to do it. So it's up to us to actually use our heads and not just grant a rezone application, listening to an applicant trying to paint the best picture of that property to get the rezone. That's it.
Okay, it doesn't sound there's any code changes appropriate. There may be a direction from council to planning staff to put appropriate restrictions on there to prevent these. The commercial buffer is just a cornucopia of things.
I think that
particular.
that also partially came out of the Area 10, Area 18 issue that we had before. And I think one of the things that we had talked about is getting a plan put together, what is acceptable use, given what the neighbors want and everything else.
Yeah. Well,
I think that's part of up there on the critical impact.
that is, yeah. I don't see any code changes other than changing commercial buffer and putting tighter definitions on our code classification.
Just make it a little bit more specific, I think would
I'm going to turn over to Luke. Luke, you've been listening to what, you have any ideas on how to solve this?
Under item 4, the zoning enforcement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I think it's been pretty well discussed. A zone change application grants council and commission the greatest flexibility and authority to impose discretion, impose conditions And if a site plan comes forward or a subsequent special use application comes forward, that's not in keeping with any of those conditions, then they'd be in violation of the conditions of approval of the zoning and would have to go back to deviate from any of those conditions. And the conditions of approval are applied to every case that we have. There are some instances where they're not necessary. It's an infill project where all the site's been developed already. But by and large, the conditions of approval, if there's any deviation from those, yes, the zoning ordinance says those come back to the planning commission and council. If they want to amend the conditions. So.
Okay, well, I'll ask then who brought it up. Does this satisfy the issue that we know now that we have the ability to do that? Yes, yes, okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I wanted to spring off what Steve, you said earlier on the number 4. You used the term zoning compliance. And I just want to have everybody revisit our native plant protection ordinance. It goes back to the early days of the town. It was developed primarily by former councilman and former commissioner Peter Curray. And I just want to make sure it's still in the books and we're still enforcing it. There's a lot of pin-to-pin blading of raw land that's residential. So I'm less concerned sometimes about zoning enforcement and more about zoning compliance. So if we can just re-embrace our native plant protection ordinance, the 12-foot setback, the 25% undisturbed, especially on raw desert land for residential. I'm not talking about after the fire, but I'm talking about blade to blade permitting before the fire. So if we could just maybe reacquaint ourselves with the existing ordinance and see if it still is an important priority. It is for me.
I share your concern. I see it all the time that part of it's education. I don't think people even know we have one. It's a good ordinance and it's
Well, it's supposed to be the
widely
law of
violated.
residential zoning.
Yeah.
And it seems to be discretionary somewhere. So
Yeah.
I just would like to draw attention to that to the extent we can get some boosters for it.
Well, we want that. We want that.
Well, the zoning compliance, frankly, and code compliance is a problem in town. I mean, we pass things and then they don't get enforced. Other towns our size have compliance officers that go around and write tickets. And that costs money, but the town may want to do that. I would,
Well, I'm not talking about proper compliance. I'm talking about permitting compliance that we need to reprioritize.
but I think people do it without, they just,
Well, then there should be
yeah.
monitoring enforcement and so forth. We have a code enforcement officer. But I don't know how somebody can get a building permit and be allowed to play pin to pin on residential.
I don't either.
So-
So where, what
I'm
is
not
the
looking
item?
for those to get shot.
Dakota? Okay, well, that's really not on that's not a change. When we put that on that second wave there, is my suggestion. I mean, it's enforcement. It's not really on the agenda today, but it's an important issue. I agree with you, Tom. At the end of the meeting, I'm sorry, at the end of the meeting, there will be 3 minutes allocated for anyone who wants to speak. I'm sorry, Ann, I should have mentioned that. Zoning language consolidation. Whose item? I don't understand that one. So who's?
Nobody's claiming it.
Confused. Since I typed this up, I get to keep talking here. And this to me as a discussion about, and it was about lighting, actually. And that I can go to the zoning manual and the ordinances and I can see we have a lighting ordinance. It's great. But the person that was talking to me about this was fussed up because there was, it seemed insufficient clarity on lighting color, lighting direction, and I know we talk about spillage and all of that, it's all in there, but here we are having a discussion, so I put it on the agenda.
What is the zoning change that you're looking for?
Well, if there's anything that has to do with lighting at all in this town, I want it all in one place. I think it makes sense. And if there's if there are lighting issues that are in other parts and are affected, there needs to at least be a reference across so people can find the information.
That seems to me that that's the second wave, longer term. I mean, it's not a critical thing that's gonna get us today.
No problem.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to know if that's actually accurate. Do we have a response from the staff on that?
Outdoor lighting as it pertains to private properties are relegated to chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2 is our residential zone, chapter 3 is our commercial zone. You can find it under development regulations, section I in both, and they are essentially identical. Commercial lighting deviates a little bit than residential, as it should. And the only other reference to lighting is in chapter 9, our sign ordinance, related to the illumination of signage. So it is in those places only.
Luke, is there any part of it that's in the technical guidelines?
They're not that I'm aware of, no,
I don't know.
no.
Well, it
There might
sounds like
be-
you-
there might be a cross-reference to the outdoor lighting ordinance and the landscape design guideline for landscape lighting, but those are exempt.
So Luke, would you say that everything is consolidated as written today?
Yes, when we went through the outdoor lighting section of the zoning ordinance circa 3 years ago, we really tied up those loose ends.
Paul, does that satisfy you?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And the next one is neighborhood preservation options and designations. Paul, that sounds like you.
It does, and I'll take that credit for that one. So in the general plan that we are, that we have, there's a whole discussion in there about recognizing neighborhoods and understanding the characteristics of those neighborhoods and learning from those neighborhoods. And so this may not really be a zoning question, but it is a burning question that people are interested in knowing where we live and knowing that that this little town is unique in a lot of ways and places. So that might be kind of fluffy, but I mean every word of it. What are you gonna do with that, Bob?
Hand it to Tom McGuire. McGuire, are you gonna handle that?
Pass.
I'm looking at, we're looking at zoning and physical zoning and plant zoning changes. So I'm going to put, how about further investigation on that? I'm not sure I understand the justification or the proposal either one. Hands up.
He had his, yeah, he has his hand up.
Okay, Steve, you want to chime in? Steve, is your hand up?
Yeah, sure. I guess my question is, because I'm kind of confused on it too. I don't know whether it's, kind of like a wishful thought, or because, and I don't know whether there is any intent to try and put some preservation. I didn't know what neighborhoods, Paul, you're referring to. Maybe that would be helpful.
Let me pop in just here. When this came up in conversation, it was said that we don't have historic neighborhoods. The town's not old enough to have really truly historic neighborhoods. And I think maybe, and I put that word in parens here because I think it's up to us and our definition. And Steve over there sitting next to the director did a really great job of looking at our town and all of the subdivisions and the neighborhoods. And he also was able to attach dates of when they were formed up. And there are some neighborhoods in this town that I think we should notice and care for. So that's my pitch on it.
I guess, what do you mean by notice and care for?
Well, if you
I think, for example, pick the contentious area, area 18, we have Saguaro West, right? Right next to it. That's a historic area. It's been that way since the guys came back from Vietnam. They've lived in that lifestyle since then. So that's a historic neighborhood that we might want to do some preservation things with. And that would be an example, Steve.
Okay, I guess I'm trying to understand what is meant by preservation? Is it to restrict uses to existing uses, restrict paint colors to existing paint colors, doors, window? I guess that's what I'm trying to understand is what is the goal? You know, at least to the one, you know, to, I guess, Paul and you, in terms of preservation. What is that?
About the historic character of the neighborhood. For instance, Saguaro West has a certain flair to it. Maybe we can define that somehow. The planning commission can define it and then state that we'd like to keep any future development in concert with this.
Okay, so you're saying in terms of a plan or a guide, not something enforceable in terms of restricting uses in that area.
We're not looking at doing that, but we want to keep the historic character of that area if possible. So yeah, there's going to be new houses, but if they can get the new houses to look and feel kind of like the older houses, that would be a good thing.
I propose we move this into number 3 there further. To me, this isn't fleshed out enough to really move on.
Mr. Mayor, I think we need to be careful on this one, in my opinion. In that you're now, to me, starting to infringe on somebody's property rights. This is not a 150-year-old subdivision like in the old neighborhoods in Chicago. That was pointed out. The town was incorporated 37 years ago, and it's a Western rural equestrian lifestyle. And if somebody bought a lot in that subdivision and wanted to build a modern home, right now they could do it. We don't have any design guidelines in town. So I think we're approaching, in my opinion, maybe Mr. Sims can comment on it, restricting a person's or affecting their property rights by having historic town, not national historic designations placed upon it.
Mr. Former Vice Mayor, you've raised 2 issues. One, everything you're talking about tonight, if it applies to existing use, creates a potential 207 issue. So you need to realize it's there, but there's mechanisms to avoid that. If you, as the elected officials, decide to adopt it, you let them opt out. But secondly, you're coming very close to design review. And I've been with you guys for a number of years, and I don't know if your community has an appetite for design review for residential districts. I think you may have an appetite for design review for commercial districts, but if you wish to go design review for residential districts, that's a challenge. And the commission needs to make that recommendation to council. Council has to decide if they want to adopt design review for residential districts.
May I comment? I really don't think that's where we're going with any of this. I think what Paul is trying to do is evolve his local landmarks program into our residential neighborhoods. And I think that's a very good idea. And I just think it's an evolution of local landmarks. And we could rename it local neighborhoods or something to that effect. I don't think we're trying to change the design of any of our neighborhoods or impose restrictions. I think we're trying to recognize the various different areas of our wonderful little town.
Thank you.
So I think that we could continue it just the way that we are in conjunction with the museum.
Right. Yeah, I think we're just looking at the, when we talk about the guidelines and things like that, it's just that, hey, can you, when you build it, can you, not forcing them, but just saying, hey, could you make it in character with the rest of the homes surrounding you in this neighborhood?
Okay, well, I think that we're not gonna have time to solve the problem tonight, so let's move that into further investigation. And the people that are interested in championing that can get together and put together a proposal on what that means, so we can decide whether it's something we want to do. Number 7 is outdoor lighting.
He's gonna do something with dark sky in this term, do we think? Where are we?
It's indeterminate right now. We're waiting developments.
Let me, I guess, make a supportive plug for Dark Skies, which Fountain Hill has, and Camp Verde and Sedona and others. It's not rocket science.
Cottonwood does now too.
We have a difference in illumination behind Black Mountain, and I don't have a specific suggestion, except that we ought to talk about it at a public meeting sometime in the near future, I would hope.
Well, I think we will talk about it. It's
This was brought up last year and during the election.
and well, we had a vote on it.
Beg pardon?
We had a vote on it 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Does anybody want to revisit the issue?
Well, there's nothing we can do with it right here and right now.
I'm just commenting, you have outdoor lighting. It
Yeah,
seems like-
I'm,
I've made my point. I don't want to take too much time.
Oh, no, we went through the whole, we compared with staff's help, chapter and verse of dark skies ordinances and our lighting ordinance. Our lighting ordinance is more restrictive and more, and offers more preparation or preservation of dark skies than the dark skies ordinance does. The dark skies ordinance very generally is fine in a, well, I'll defer to the staff with the details, but the conclusion we came to was dark skies sounds great, and our ordinance provides dark skies better than the code, the regulations that are under the dark skies umbrella. And that's why we didn't do anything with it.
well, the current status on that is that there's been a change of heart, it seems, from the dark skies people, where the designation is has changed. And we have our ordinances, and that's being investigated. So there really is nothing to do until that kind of comes to a head. We can't really have a meeting. There's nothing to talk about.
Right, okay.
But that it is an active issue in town.
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to add, building upon Mr. Lamar said, the other key issue was enforcement. How is it going to be enforced?
That's what I
Someone
thought
from-
number 4 was.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a good question, because we have 2 new commercial signs in town that were permitted, they're interior lit, but do not comply with our lighting code.
Well,
Enforcement begins in this building, and we need to be consistent if we can.
let me just,
Grandfathering.
I do have a question on that too. If we are getting a McDonald's, is that gonna be a backlit sign like all the rest of them? They look horrible.
well, that's not appropriate for the meeting, Dusty.
I understand, but. it is
Yeah,
something that needs to be-
we can't get specific, but it's a very good question, though.
Well, it all relates to enforcement.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. How do we enforce our ordinances when we don't have a zoning enforcement officer,
That's
And-
why everything's been complaint driven
Driven,
up till now.
which is not especially effective?
Well, is there any appetite behind putting, it's not free. I mean, you're talking about $150,000, $200,000 a year of expenses to have a robust enforcement. Does the town have the appetite for it? We want to pay for that?
Mr. Mayor, I'm just requesting enforcement when they come to town hall, not when someone does something that has not been permitted.
Oh, you're talking about the old,
Talking about signs that have been allowed in the last year or 2 years, which do not comply with the signing ordinance unless they were grandfathered. They're interior lit. I mean, it's great to go over to the new places on Carefree Highway and see the overhead lights shining down, because that shows the town code works.
Yeah.
But then we have a couple of others. So again, I'm not fully briefed on this, but anything we can do to try to be consistent. with the
This goes
standards
back to, I
we have.
believe, your comment earlier about getting the zoning ordinance, getting rid of the, I call them loopholes, but they're places where discretion can be used, or places where interpretation can be used differently. Let's just figure out what we want and then make it as specific as possible so that there's not wiggle room that'll get us in trouble later on.
Well, I don't think there's wiggle room. I think I agree with there's signs, many signs in town that don't meet. Would you please put on a future agenda code enforcement and for possible direction to staff?
Mr. Mayor, in my opinion, the Dark Skies membership is equivalent to wearing a kick me sign in junior high school. Our ordinance is already better than what they've got anyway.
Okay,
Let me
that's
just-
under
Let
investigation.
me just put this on the record, and it's none of my business really. It's a council issue, apparently. But, you know, if you're gonna do proactive enforcement, then you better fund it.
Yeah.
Because, what you're looking at is fraught with issues that are gonna come right back to you, and it's not gonna be happy people.
No.
No,
And also, if you don't get them all, if you just have like, oh, let's say half a dozen folks and they're all running around and they cite Billy, Johnny and Bo, and then Billy, Johnny and Bo look at their neighbors or look around town and start doing surveys and they see that same problem elsewhere. And all of a sudden you're getting people screaming in class actions about selective enforcement and equal protection issues. And so just
What
what you asked for.
what
Well,
you created was a 5,000 person HOA.
Mhm.
I live in one, I've been on the board for 10 years. There's 46 units and you just can't imagine the problems with 46 units, not 5,000. Or
It's-
I should say 2,700 houses. I agree, Mr. Lamar.
okay, these meetings cannot solve this problem.
Right.
This is a issue for council. We'll have an item on it. We'll discuss it and we'll vote and that will be it. That's how we'd resolve these. Commissioner Breckner, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to touch on, there was comment about loopholes in our zoning ordinance or other changes that may be desired. And I would suggest that if there are any specific loopholes or changes to reduce it to writing, because I know, the planning commission, we're not experts on drafting zoning ordinances. I don't think the council is either. And if there's a desire to delve into that, I think the council is going to need to look at hiring an expert to analyze any specific items that are raised by members of the council or commission as to any particular problems with the zoning ordinance. Otherwise, we can't just go on a goose chase looking for what loopholes there might perceive to be. So something to maybe put on the council's agenda to consider if they want to look at making any changes to the zoning ordinance is to hire a professional to look at our zoning ordinance and any perceived problems with it. That's it.
Okay, thank you. So outdoor lighting, we've moved that to, we're awaiting developments from the Dark Skies people. And so, I'm sorry. Further investigation. Yeah. Hopefully we'll have nothing on that chart when we're finished here. Have we bypassed something and not put it on?
Land use was under.
Yeah, we'll just get that over there then too. Yeah, thank you. Okay, the next one is special use permits. What is the issue there?
The belief that they should go with the business and not with the property. So if we're going to take the time to examine a proposal for a business located in our town, and if they're asking for a special use permit and we decide to grant it, that's great. But if they decide that that business isn't viable or wants to move away or whatever, that use permit goes with them and doesn't stay with the property. We have properties in this town right now zoned under a special use permit, I think, for manufacturing along Cave Creek Road. And that happened just
Yeah.
as I've described it. So
But
I don't know how you
yeah.
remedy that, but
is that potential code change? Can that be done in code? To do that universally, let's put it that way.
The beautiful thing about a special use is the discretion that the commission and council are given to give conditions. That can be a condition of approval. Currently, right now, once a special use has ceased, I believe they have, I don't know if it's 1 year or 2 years for that use to remain entitled for that property. Typically, the special use runs with the property, but council can condition it otherwise. So I
why-
don't believe that needs necessarily a code change.
That's
It can
one
be
of those-
done on a case by case basis. That's where. your
Why
discretion lies.
why wouldn't you make it run with the business all the time? What's the argument for not doing what Paul suggests?
If, right here, for example, the auto repair shop, they've got several hundreds of thousands of dollars probably in equipment and lifts and everything. That business was pre-existing prior to the town. Now it would require a special use. If they decided to close up shop and leave, then you've got essentially a business, a long-standing use in a long-standing building that would no longer be compliant, and have to come back through for approval from the council again.
So you think it'd be better to leave it with discretion of how we apply this?
Correct.
Paul, how's that hit you?
it's just one more opportunity for confusion. If they want, if they go to the trouble to make a request for a special, very specific use, and they did, the one I remember. It made all the sense in the world to grant that. But now that they're gone, it doesn't make any sense to have that kind of use attached to that property.
Okay.
Which property and how long has it been gone?
What was it, the distillery and now.
Never established. So its entitlement is no more. If they wanted to do that,
But-
they would have to come back
But
through.
that's what's happened. What I'm talking about is the process.
Okay.
So I'd love to see it go with the business.
You can
So,
also make it so that if I have the auto repair business there and I sell it to somebody else, I can sell the business to that person, that use permit go with that.
so I see those as two opposing.
No, if I'm continuing the same exact business, but you're changing the ownership, you wouldn't require another special use.
What I'm hearing
When
is
you buy
we
the
need,
business.
we need to leave it with discretion is what I'm hearing. Is that,
Legal might have-
Legal, yeah.
oh, turn your camera on.
The code does say that it expires within 12 months. So you could change that amount, right? I'm just looking at one.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Brecker, sorry.
I was just gonna say, it can be problematic to try and make it go with a business. A lot of times businesses sell on asset sales rather than the actual entity itself for a variety of reasons, including liabilities and so on. So I'm not sure that would be a wise move to have it go with the business.
Okay, not a problem.
So I'm lost. Is the problem solved? Paul, you're the one that brought this up. What is your on this
Yeah.
at this point?
Problem solved. Thank you, Councilman.
Okay. Eliminate that one. And number 9 is other. Yes, sir.
I gotta move back.
Can we have a motion for a 5-minute break?
I
So
move we
moved.
take a 5-minute break.
Okay, 5-minute break.
My effort to remain hydrated has been highly successful.
Those people are coming to the floor too much. And the voters. We'll do that.
We lost there. Okay, the next one is the subdivision ordinance, including but not limited to sewer hookup requirements. I know exactly who the knucklehead that proposed this is. It's me.
You.
This is my 5 year. Yes, sir.
Point three, number 9 for other, I'd
Oh.
like to briefly talk about Councilman Rhodes' topic of design review. And as a commissioner, I would like guidance from the council and the public as to whether that's really desirable for the town, and if so, what kind of parameters that should be consisting of. I don't see that anywhere on any
Yeah,
of
I don't
these
think
lists.
anybody's talking about residential. I mean.
Well, either residential or commercial, but as a commissioner, I would like guidance from council as to what types of things that are proposed.
I think what we're talking about is, I think what we were talking about was, say, for instance, the town core. What do you want the town core to look like? We have an eclectic mix of modern, Western, and I don't know what it is, but there's others.
Everything.
So what do we want? We've got, and I think it's more oriented towards the new Cave Creek, when that state land trust land gets sold and we have the 120 acres that's going to be commercial and 120 that's going to be commercial buffer. What do we want that to look like? Do we want it to be eclectic like the town core? Do we want more of a plan to look to it? How do we want to do that? How do we want to handle that? And that's, I think, what we were talking about. And that's something that I think is long-term. And that's a discussion we ought to have with townspeople. What do you want?
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
I'm not looking at us, the council, to solve that. I'm looking for to have the planning commission have a hearing on it at some point. Let people come in and speak. What do you think it should look like?
Thank you.
Hope that helps, Charlie.
Is there any other comment on potential?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Steve. We'll let you go first since you're remote.
This is for Council Sims. Is he there or is he taken off?
Kristen's here.
Okay, Kristen, if we were to impose any design guidelines and restrictions on commercial properties, could that open the door to any potential Prop 207 issues from State Land Department?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so I thought it might be a good opportune moment to bring that up since it's in discussion.
Any conversation about any kind of design review as to existing uses will have, that will have to be discussed and addressed, how that affects current uses, current property rights, and the potential liabilities and risks under Prop 207 and other types of constitutional violations.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking only about the portion of Cave Creek that we've annexed, that the state land still owns, that will at some point come for sale. What do we want that to look like?
The not yet developed.
Not yet developed.
And Commissioner Councilman Rhodes, I think in the past, something came up regarding making a change within our zoning ordinance. And it might impact that state land. And I think Luke, if he's still there, can talk about that. But they were very swift in responding. We would have a nice lawsuit on our hands. Luke, I don't know if you want to bring up that.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. About 2010 through 2012, when we were going through our zoning ordinance, reformatting it, revising it, consolidating it, doing all the things that are some of the basis of conversation tonight. We went into section 3.5 of the zoning ordinance, which contains all the uses categorized by which zone they're allowed and the process by which they can be entitled and developed. We were eliminating and changing things that were in the general commercial and commercial buffer zones, and the state land department became aware of it and sent us a very nice letter kindly reminding us of the agreements that we had in place at the time. So a lot of those uses and categories weren't changed as a result of that at that time.
Not
So I think
saying,
that goes into,
I'm not saying uses, changing any of the uses. What do we want the design to look like? And since they haven't built yet, we do have that opportunity. Is that not correct?
We would have to examine what those agreements are that we have in place with state land and may have to have a conversation with them about that.
Those would be the, there's there's a pre-resolution agreement. There's four resolutions. And then there's four ordinances that came out of those resolutions, and you'd have to review those. But I didn't see anywhere in there where it says that we can't. I made the mistake of reading through all 9 documents.
You need a job, Dusty. Keep you off the.
It was painful. I'm agreeing with Shakespeare and all the lawyers.
Yeah, I think the first question to ask is there an appetite for design review anywhere in town?
Never has been.
No, that's not true.
Is there an appetite? Does anybody in favor?
I'll make a comment if I may.
Sure.
Town's, I think, done very well for 37 years since its incorporation without it. And I think it was brought up some time ago in the town core. There's only less than a handful of properties. And if you look at what's been built without design guidelines, I've seen the plans for the focus on the family. You've got what's called Rebel Ranch. You've got the Buffalo Chip that was rebuilt. You've got the Stagecoach Village. I could go on, all built without design guidelines. And I think the people putting their money on the line to create a business, they don't need more government intervention. They need less. And I think and they've all done nicely. You know, the designs have come out nicely. And to do it in residential, you're creating one huge HOA, which in my opinion is not good. So I think you know where I stand.
Oh, absolutely.
Clearly. You got it.
Just why?
You know, I think that we need to recognize the extent to which staff has worked with developers who have come in, sometimes with success, sometimes with less success than we would like. But I think that's been a very important tool. It's one that generally doesn't get us into trouble. I think that's one, Ron, that you probably would agree with is a reasonable way to go about it.
Yes, and I think, let me just say this, I like Disney World, but I do realize if I'm going to Epcot or that I'm not really in Rome, it's just fake. And
Really?
this town has never been one thing. Well, way back when it was mostly a stopping off point to get to Prescott. And there's a lot of sheep herding and a whole lot of silver mining, and that was it. And there's something genuine about this town that is endearing. And a lot of it has to do with, and I'll use the word eclectic. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I used to be in I don't want a Western movie set when you come into Cave Creek. That's silly to my mind. And I think most of the people in this town, particularly those that have professions and business and work and don't spend a lot of time in the town core, or don't spend a lot of time at town hall, understand that what they really want out of government is to have the water services and sewer and a fire department and have things run smoothly. And they assume that we're going to do what's best for the town as a whole, and not have a committee have a whole section of commercial property looking all the same.
There was an old TV series called Weeds, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all just look the same. And that's Southern California. And I don't want that. I don't think I want that for this town, and I've been here a long time.
Okay, I'm sensing a kind of a negativity towards design review in general. Is anybody getting a different vibe?
No, and the design review is putting constraints on private property, and I don't think that's had anything to do with health, safety, welfare, which is our business that we're in. And those constraints could lead to a diminution of value, which would inform and then prop up Prop 207 in a big way. And maybe you were on count. Did you guys look at the reflectivity of paints for houses at one time? And they were one count. Okay, and found out that six of their homes wouldn't actually meet the criteria. So if you outline the design guidelines and something comes in that you don't like, there's a real human error factor to make a bad decision, and you end up in court and you're just going to be writing checks. And we got too many things to do with our money other than paying people to not do stuff.
Well, Commissioner Spitzer, you really opened this one up. Are you satisfied with your result?
I just asked the question because it came up earlier, but never made it to any board, so I didn't know what was happening.
Well, I suspect it'll come up again because it's, I admit that there are some properties in the town core that I grit my teeth over. Anyway.
And I just want to pipe in here that the eclectic quality of how this organic town has grown is why we choose here.
Okay, well, let's move on then. Commissioner Spitzer interrupted my favorite topic, sewer.
Yes.
The sewer is, we're still subsidizing it to the tune of $2.5 million a year in a combination of sales tax and direct contributions from the general fund. We have better uses for that money, and that ought to be a major long-term strategic commitment of the town, is to get out of that negative situation. My proposal to start doing that is, number one, is to not allow any subdivisions to put in septic tanks. They either have to put in a package unit and return the water to us, or they have to put the waste down to our plant for subdivisions. I think that's reasonable. That'll also keep, we got this subdivision that's not a subdivision up in Cava Springs sitting there rotting away. What a waste of money, time, effort. How much money we put into fees on that thing, legal, staff time, personnel time. So it also tends to not develop out in the middle of nowhere, making it expensive. So I'd like to put that on there and I think it's critical. I want to put a plug in that because I'd hate to have a subdivision come in tomorrow and be able to put a bunch of septic tanks in, take the water from our water system. If they are, well, they have to bring water, but we need that water back. We need that water to put in the ground to protect the town. We're going to be looking at recharging more water here in the near future. And we want to make sure for drought purposes that new subdivisions do the same.
Mr. Mayor, anything that brings more water back to the town. I was general counsel for Fountain Hills Water District, and one of my friends from Gallagher and Kennedy was the environmental lawyer that did the whole replanning of their recharge system, got it approved and everything, and that really turned around Fountain Hills. Not only with their problem, they had a proven problem with excess effluent sometimes, and other times they had just a water problem, and it helped both. And they have big, long, deep recharge basins now up in Fountain Hills. So anything you can do to bring it back and purify it and run it through again, I'm for.
Steve?
Yeah, thanks. Let me lower my hand.
Next to his name.
I agree with you. I'm not sure if the subdivision ordinance doesn't already require it, but if it doesn't, I'm in agreement. But since you're bringing up sewer, there's one item that I thought I would raise where I believe we currently have for residential, if a residential property is within 300 feet of sewer, that property is required to connect. And, I've noticed that we may have some potential issues with that, considering that we're a rural community and we have some very large parcels, butting up to the town core. We have DR 89, DR 190, and very undulating terrain on Schoolhouse Road and Spurcross Road. And, you can have this very expensive and very, very problematic issue for some DR property owners, where they could get caught up being within 300 feet and have a cost of 6 figures if they want to build, or if their septic tank goes, and then pump stations because of the undulating terrain. So I'm not quite sure that 300 feet is appropriate when it comes to desert rural land. I thought I'd bring that as a potential item to consider in future related to sewer.
You think it should be less than that?
No, I think there maybe should be an exclusion for desert rural land.
We've had that for 30 years. When we have drought, I am very reluctant to change that, but
Maybe it should be from the residents instead of from the property line.
well,
Because
I'm not recommending we change it at all. All I'm interested in tonight is getting the subdivision portion of that put together.
I understand. I didn't mean to throw it off. I
But
just,
we'll keep it in mind. I mean, there's no proposals. The only proposal being worked right now is potential expansion of the main sewer lines to neighborhoods that are compact enough to make it economically feasible
Mr. Mayor, though,
long term.
what what was said was that be it 300 feet, it has to be, you have to have a town or municipal sewer line
Yep.
to tap into. You can't, you're not going to have someone put
Without the main line,
a
it's,
mile.
right.
Yeah, there has to be an existing.
oh, I see what you mean. Yeah,
Usable.
Yep.
Sewer line in the ground within that
right.
300 feet.
And it's been that way for 30 years.
Right. That's the problem with density, 1, 2, 5, 3 acre zoning is, to put a sewer and utilities in. It's very expensive initially and very costly, as you know, to maintain and to keep it up.
That's right. Okay, the next one on here is the gates on subdivisions or groups of homes. I think I had this one too. And I may be in error here, and Luke's getting up like I am.
Chomping at the bit, Mayor.
I don't think there ought to be gates in town.
I believe all 4 of these were yours, Mr. Mayor. Just to back the bus up. The second and third are actually both covered in the subdivision ordinance now. You bring up something in your first bullet about requiring new subdivisions to have sewer or do something like that. That would
Or return the
require,
water.
yeah, that would require a change to our subdivision ordinance
Yeah.
and probably likely the town code as well. But items 2 and 3 are already covered in our zoning ordinance or in the subdivision ordinance, excuse me. Private streets are not allowed and gates are not allowed. But the subdivision ordinance allows for an exception. So based on different criteria and circumstances, the town council, with the recommendation of the planning commission, could consider an exception to allow private streets in certain cases. I don't see a case where gates would be.
Why
get
wouldn't we
granted an exception.
encourage private streets? I mean, that's a street. I mean, we have miles and miles that we have to maintain. Why would we?
But you can grant an exception to allow private streets and not allow a gate, which is what was done with Hidden Canyon.
Well, that is what that is my proposal, basically, is to, if there's a subdivision with enough and it's dead end, there's no one going through it. It's just a subdivision is to allow private streets, but not allow gated communities as such.
Yes, Mayor. I'm against private streets because of the image that's conveyed. People who live on private streets patrol those streets.
Mhm.
They don't like people walking through those streets. In fact, it's exclusive. And that's not what this town is about. You know, we're inclusive. Now, if we want to say new developments, put in a 30-year quality road and then we'll maintain it when it starts going bad, I'm okay with that. You know, let the developer put it in initially and then we'll just maintain it.
Mhm.
But the concept of private roads, I think, is not consistent with the ideal for Cave Creek.
I'm gonna take exception with that, given that I live in a community with all private roads. And I'd love for the town to take it back. I mean, because right now, if a water line were to burst, it's at the association's expense, and we're talking many, many thousands of dollars. And we do not have a gate, and we welcome everybody, including their dogs and whatnot, so.
And I would add that with Hidden Canyon, as a condition of approval, we required an overlay for a public easement. So although it's private and they're paying for it, it's essentially public.
That's interesting. Oh, any other thoughts on whether this is a good idea or not?
We had years ago, I mean, I can remember reading there are no private roads and the problem was the founding fathers that did that. That was one of the sins of the fathers because there was no funding mechanism to maintain them. And that's the issue that you're looking at it from me as well. I'm with you 100% on that.
Oh, somebody agrees with me. That's not typical. Other thoughts?
I think we already have a number of private roads. I mean, I live off of Cahava Ranch Road and it's a private road. The only thing that I wish is they get rid of the stupid speed humps or speed bumps, but other than that, I'm pretty happy with it. They do a pretty good job.
So no one will object if I put it on. I put it on critical
I mean,
because I don't want a subdivision coming in or someone.
I think for future subdivisions, yeah, there shouldn't be any private roadways for a future subdivision.
There shouldn't be.
Should not.
Oh, so you are so you are in opposition.
Sewer. No, if we're talking about the sewer, no, they should have the sewer. I mean,
Yeah.
any subdivision that comes in here should have a sewer.
Yeah.
If they're gonna have a water hookup, they need the sewer too. But if you're talking about the roadways, you know, how they did it with Hidden Canyon is fine. You know,
Okay,
have them do the private with the public easement.
I think we're in agreement.
Yeah.
Critical.
Yeah.
All right. And number 4, Luke, subdivision, you said that was wrong too?
No, that's gonna be more in the vein of your number 1 with the sewer hookups. I know fire hydrants are currently, I believe they're mandated through the International Fire Code that we have adopted. So fire hydrants have to be on certain distance. We can look into if we want to adopt something more strict than what the IFC would require in our town code. That's something we can look at.
Okay. That's not my item. Which one is it?
Hydrants.
Well, I just leave it off. It's taken care of. It's already, it shouldn't even be an item. You can throw that one away. We have an other here. Whose item is
And
that?
the other is secondary cross-traffic path, across town. Is there another way through town beside Cave Creek Road?
I can tell you the staff has been working on that for years. Decades, yeah. There's one private property they got an issue with, and then we'd have to do some really mean stuff that we haven't done before to get that completed.
There is in the budget this year an emergency exit to the east along, Luke, help me, what's the road that goes? The one that's the emergency exit we're putting in.
Arroyo alignment from
Arroyo, yeah.
72nd Street East or West, I'm sorry. It's something that Hal negotiated with the large property owner along Grapevine there.
Yeah, so there is an emergency thing going in, but that's not, it, believe me, I've driven it. It is not ready. They're gonna fix it a little bit, but
That
it's
will-
not ready
that
for
will-
traffic.
Yeah, that will provide emergency access for kind of those remote areas in the northeast part of town. If they can't get to schoolhouse, that gives them another way south and east. So it'll grant access to a large segment of the population.
I'm not sure that, that doesn't qualify as a transportation route though.
Certainly doesn't.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Well, where would that be worked, Luke? And is the town core plan going to work an alternate
It currently contains that goal in action. The current town core plan talks about alternative access through the town core.
okay, so,
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, there's military to the south is kind of that main alignment. And then we've looked at, I believe it's Grapevine, but there's really no, it's much more cumbersome there. I'm sorry. It's much more difficult on the north side of Cave Creek Road because of the washes that really bisect the town in those points. So once again, all weather crossings, those types of things, not necessarily desirable from the town standpoint. So the south of Cave Creek Road is really where we're trying to get easement and right of way to be able to extend an alternate route.
okay, and it's not a planning issue, but I think that would be put under the town core plan. So. Okay, are there any, sorry,
Just
Tom?
under other, because
Yeah.
I'm trying to stick my nose in. I had just three things I wanted to suggest to the commission. Could we continue the tradition we used to do before of underwriting APA training for the commission and anybody the town manager would like to send as well? Because we've kind of gotten out of that practice for many years, and it was pretty routine that we had APA training for the commission. And then I was going to suggest this become an annual event with the council and the commission meeting and joint session. And maybe have a workshop before the joint session where you could bring in somebody from the APA who specializes in small community planning concepts or ideas that could be orchestrated by the staff. And the third thing, I just wanted to float this, and I don't have anything to really demonstrate why it's a good idea. I just want to get it out there as an icebreaker. Micro preservation. If you come into Cave Creek on the left-hand side, there's that Episcopalian church, and the land around is actually in Carefree. And a few years ago, most of you will remember, stop me already if I need to be stopped. But anyway, a few years ago, Carefree had a project to develop that land into a series of fairly tiny lot townhomes right on the road with a series of walls around them. It is a view corridor, and it's not in this town, and we don't have the money, and it's not for sale. I know all those things. But just the concept of maybe doing micro preservation when private property comes up in the market. If we have a preservation fund, which David Phelps has spoken about in the past, and we used to have it years ago with Spur Cross Ranch. So I wanted to plug two things with the commission. And one is micro preservation something that would have any feasibility in the town? And really no size too small. For example, at Rancho Manana, it's already preserved with all the saguaros on top of the hill. As you come around the curve, I think, and I would defer to Luke, but I think all of that is already allocated for non-disturbing on that property. But those are the types of things where we don't necessarily have to acquire. But if there are some things that might be able to be just folded into the routine process, or something becomes available. A house is torn down and the family wants to liquidate the property and it's up on a ridge or somewhere significant. I don't know, I don't have a specific example. And I'm not even sure if any of this works, but I just want to float the concept. And I do want to plug later on with the council, if we can maybe somehow refeed the kitty on the preservation fund with whatever sort of people think is appropriate, but I just wanted to float that with you guys to see if there's any feasibility.
I just have one question. Just for the, what the APA is that?
Oh, the American Planning Association.
Okay, that's what
Yeah.
I thought.
Years ago, the training was provided to all the commissioners during the course of their service, and it's kind of been valuable. But then I thought if we actually resubscribe our participants, maybe we could get them to come out and do a workshop before this annual meeting, have it public. And there's got to be some tricks that they know about that's state of the art with the latest legal interpretations about what small communities, even though constrained, might be able to get away with, at least temporarily, but other communities are getting away with. So-
Temporarily and not costly.
Yes, yeah. So anyway, just wanted to plug that in.
I'm all for the training.
So
You taking notes over there, Stephen?
I think one other note on that, we
Yeah,
need to,
yeah, put that in.
this is one of the few towns around that we really don't have any playgrounds for children. And we are starting to get more children around. We might want to think about in a couple different places, putting small playgrounds in, if we have some extra property that we can do that on.
We have Desert Awareness Park. That is clearly a playground for kids.
No, I understand,
Yeah.
but I'm talking about in some of the neighborhoods or near some of the neighborhoods. It would be nice to have little playgrounds like. There's a lot of kids that I see floating around. I'd rather not them floating around on the street. I'd rather them find a playground to play with.
I think we have to look at those neighborhoods.
Did you hear the question?
Yeah. We heard it. All right, so I think we're at the update town core plan process and timeline for readoption. Are you prepared to answer that, Stephen?
Best of my knowledge, the planning commission had a workshop last month.
Steve, go ahead.
Step up to the microphone, please.
Just gonna read from my notes so I don't butcher anything, Mayor. So to best of my knowledge, the planning commission held a workshop last month, distributed a working copy of town core plan where goals and actions have been taken with corresponding ordinances, resolutions, and or any other document. Staff asked planning commission to review and comment. Process will come together after planning commission planning commission will begin in earnest in the fall with hearings and workshops. I don't know if Commissioner or Chairman Breckner has anything to follow up with that.
That's accurate. Yeah, I believe we'll take this up in earnest in the fall.
Okay, is
I
that
have a question. I would like to see the parking plan. You know, we have all these buildings downtown that have restaurants and bars and everything else. They've all added outdoor seating, which didn't have parking associated. It would be nice to identify for all the commercial properties, what's their official occupancy? What additional occupancy do they have? And what are the parking spaces associated with it? So that at least we can try to start figuring out what are we going to have to do to wrestle parking. And I know it's not necessarily our problem because it was things the previous councils allowed. But at this point, we do have a parking issue, particularly on Friday and Saturday nights.
In that respect, I have a question. I understand and I haven't been following it, but there was a proposal for a 1 acre piece next to Kiwanis for parking. Do we have that available to the town or I'm not sure where that's at.
it's on an agenda item, but it's really not
That
germane.
doesn't solve the
Yeah.
whole problem. It's down.
No, I get it. I was just curious.
No, it's a good idea.
The Buffalo Chip has bought a pretty good section of property, but that's not, I think what is right now, I don't know of any restrictions. And someone buys a builds a restaurant. They put in parking for 20 tables and they put 40 tables outside. Now they have
Exactly.
parking for 20. Isn't that something that ought to be on this board here somewhere before we,
Well, that's what I put in my little notes with the parking.
yeah?
I put it in the town court plan and in the notes that I have.
Okay.
there. I have some
Okay, good.
bullet points laying out the parking, please.
I think that is essential for this town.
And I do think it is a good idea to get the 1 acre that solves a big problem, but it doesn't solve the whole problem.
From my discussions with Luke, their staff are always looking for avenues to find parking. In the town core plan is a guide, it's not going to solve we can identify that parking's an issue, which we know. But finding the parking is the
At least now we can identify, here's where the buildings are that have the occupancy, here's the outdoor occupancy they've added onto it, and here's the parking they have, and here's the shortfall that we need.
Dusty, we got into this at the last planning commission meeting and Luke explained to us that parking is required based on the square footage of the building. However, if there's outdoor eating, they will add that square footage to the calculation and expand the parking for that additional outside space.
That's what it does now. What we're still living with are the sins of the past. And that's the problem that we're gonna have going on, because as everybody knows, we grandfather everything in here. So we have a grandfathered issue of parking. How do we fix that issue? At least identify the scope of the issue so that maybe the council and planning commission and the staff can work together to solve it. Because we do have a parking issue.
Well, it's good to know that it's not getting any worse if that process is going forward, because some areas of town is really bad. Okay, the last one on here is this is gonna be a tricky one, transfer of development rights. So who wants to take the lead on explaining that one? Some kind of commissioner or ex-commissioner.
So, if I have all the details in my head on this one, if some development wants to come to town and wants to create a building on property, and for some reason or another, the building envelope is larger than what's allowed for that piece of property. There is a process here in town that that developers can use to purchase a piece of property somewhere else. And that will answer the question about getting the right ratio of building envelope to the property being built upon. And it's been used and it kind of works, but it seems like the list of properties that are available for transfer density, which is what this is called, it isn't prioritized. I mean, we don't know which places we want to have the developer purchase at a different rate than just finding the cheapest one. And so it's a kind of a loophole for a project where you can actually buy your way out of the ordinance criteria by buying a piece of property that's a rock on top of a hill. I'd like to see that reviewed.
Okay, so would a review and report to, well, I think the commission maybe is the one to start with that. Someone help me here.
That came out of the Great Recession and the ability to increase the revenue so we didn't find ourselves in a position where we're on the verge of going away. As far as prioritizing available properties, there may be some legal issues with that. I would think when we start making preferred country type things.
I guess I'm not following where we want to make sure that people are spending more money on the property or buying the property
Well,
that we dictate versus the one that the developer
Right.
chooses.
Yeah, yeah, well, you know, they've got what is there is there three locations? Yeah, for a density transfer? Three remaining, but if
That's my knowledge, correct?
Yeah.
It is more side of things, but chosen by council in the past. You had property chosen, correct?
Yeah, I think that's what we did. We there were certain ones that like, Brenner Hill had some stuff and other stuff that we didn't want to see, little boxes on the hillside, Malvina Reynolds type stuff. So that's why that's in place. And the places it's been utilized are of course along Carefree Highway, which is the golden goose that actually pays for the fire protection and the stuff that we're able to do now for the community that we weren't able to do before. Puts us in a much more secure financial position. I mean, I was here when in 2008 when the crap hit the fan, and it was pretty bad. So that's the reason we have that, and don't necessarily like it, but it certainly makes it better for the whole community. And the decisions I've always tried to make were ones that benefited the whole community. If I ticked off a neighborhood, well, that's too bad.
So density transfer will become an issue when the state land trust decides to sell that land off, because we're gonna have to figure that out. So I think we ought to take a look at the density transfer, but I think that's the further investigation.
I agree with you. I don't understand the ins and outs. That's a good point.
Yeah.
'Cause we've got a whole new world opening up over there.
Right, when they open up those 120 acres or that stuff there, there's an opportunity. There's an
Right.
opportunity for them to, developers to purchase some of the stuff that we've got, zoned for preservation. Was part of the thing we were looking at as well.
Well, it would seem to make sense that you wouldn't just take any old piece of land. You'd get something that was on a hilltop or had some kind of special feature that made it worth preserving.
Yeah. Yeah.
Steve?
It'd be real interesting to know what council says about prioritizing
Yeah.
where we want them to buy.
I think our code has, I think we have an exhibit attached to our code related to the transfer density where we've identified certain areas. And I think it worked to our benefit. I seem to recall some of the land that got preserved above Hidden Canyon was utilized in transfer density to protect that viewscape. And I think with the state trust land, I believe there's land already designated for open space and so on, but I think we could take a look at that, and potentially add areas within there that may be worth preserving.
Yeah, this as a side, I drove up to the state land trust land about 3 weeks ago. And I actually walked through the gate and walked up and down and, saw probably about 4,000 acres. That's one big flat area. And if you go right to the gate where the state land trust is, and you look right down the valley, you can see Highway 17, Carefree Highway, and that massive chip plant. That's an 8-mile straight shot. So I have some concerns, and that's one of the reasons why I brought, what do we want New Cave Creek to look like? Because there's more people coming and more chip plant and everything else. There's 5 phases. They're working on phase 2 right now.
Yeah. Okay, so that's for review. I think that's a good one. We are at the end of the items. Is there anything else that someone wants to bring up here?
Just 10 seconds. I promise. Is the commission familiar with the need for an ordinance or a tightening of an ordinance to prohibit non-underground burying of electric lines? Because I've heard on Schoolhouse Road that new construction is not required to do underground utilities. So I don't know all the facts on this, but I wanted to just raise the issue. Is there an exemption in any areas of our town that does not require for new development underground utilities and permits the poles above ground?
I think that would be for staff.
To the best of my knowledge, that's reviewed by the building department. And if that's going to be acceptable to use underground or above ground, what we review is if there's any underground utilities, if it's compliant with the ordinance and such, but there's no exemption to the best of my knowledge on that end, so.
As a follow-up, we do not have any ordinance that requires new construction to have their utility underground. I mean, obviously, if it's not that, it's all above ground, correct? I mean, Steve, there is no ordinance. It's all regulated by the building. So everything could be overhead.
Utilities are installed, correct?
Yeah.
Reviewed by such, and
Yeah.
utility entity as well.
Now, a developer can require his subdivision to go underground, and it's extremely costly. And the maintenance is extremely costly, which is why nowadays it's seldom done.
Thank you. We were required to do underground utilities in our home, as was my neighbors and their custom homes. But I'm not advocating one way or the other. It's just that somebody had said that if we fix some language, anything new coming in, this was mentioned for the schoolhouse corridor, that the utilities would be automatically underground, but it sounds like from staff standpoint, it's negotiated when they come in.
entity. So if APS says you go underground.
Okay, so it's utility.
Yeah, and
I don't think APS doesn't pay for lines.
Not-
Someone else pays for it.
Like used to
I've
get
done that
500
out at Ben
feet.
Avery.
and there's a certain level of power going through them that they do not underground. So
Right. And
that's,
it's
that's the other issue.
4 times the cost of an above ground.
Oh, it's
Line.
more than that.
Yeah.
I think,
My numbers are old.
yeah, so am I.
All right, is it for no other questions that we're going to move to public comment?
I have to be excused.
Sorry?
I have to get going. So.
Okay. Steve, thank you for attending.
Karen Huckle?
Karen.
Oh, I didn't have public comment. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, no worries. Anna Marcelo. Hi, everybody.
Good evening, Anna Marcelo, Cave Creek resident. So glad I came tonight. I almost didn't because I didn't feel well, but I'm really glad I came. On code enforcement, what we have now stinks. It's so draconian. It pits neighbor against neighbor. It's neighborhood driven complaint. You have an opportunity here. Hire a code enforcement officer. If Adam Stein can't do it, you're at a point where you just can't avoid it. Now, Steve Lamar said that if you had a code enforcement officer who would make sure that it was fairly done. Well, what do you have now? If a neighbor hates you, he's going to report you, but he's not going to report the guy across the street. So I think that's really important. On design review, we did have a design review committee. There were 18 of us for 2 years, and we had no legal teeth. But Ian Cardwell was our chairperson, and we met. And out of our efforts, Ron Short, who was the director, and Ian Cardwell, you have the Four Sons gas station at the corner. It's low, it's rocks. It was just so beautifully done. Not because we had any rules or anything with teeth. It was just working with us. The Las Tiendas Shopping Center, that was efforts of our committee working with Ron Lawrence. What a fantastic job. And the Grotto, who doesn't love the Grotto? That was Andrew Czar working with our committee, not forcing them, but like Ernie said, it's people coming here who wants to join in and try to keep some identity. So anyway, on design review, you can look up the records. We did have a committee with no teeth, but it worked really well. And it's something maybe you can think about again. On horses an acre. Our town doesn't allow horses on an acre. I wonder if you went to that, what would happen to the wildlife corridor? Wouldn't we lose that, Ernie? The 12-foot wildlife corridor with an acre? And then for the sewer, I was within 300 feet of a hookup on Surrey, and I was required to hook up. I think you should extend that 300 feet to these established neighborhoods, Surrey, Blue Ridge, Carriage. It stops at 300 feet, but if you extended your line to 1,000 or 1,200, think of all those people on sewer who could hook into it. And it would certainly eliminate a lot of the odor that we do have on often occasions. Now I'll give you something to cause you not to sleep tonight. When the state trust land, if and when it is, the 120 acres of multifamily, Mayor Francia confirmed at a public meeting when I asked the question, how many people could end up there? He said between 4,000 and 6,000 people. They would carry the voting block. They would carry your voting block. Think about that. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Ms. Marcelo. All these people and only one speaker. Okay.
I don't mind saying something.
Well, Well, put, why don't you take a paper there and fill it, hand it after you say your words.
Probably anxious to get
Go,
out.
go ahead and talk first. You can fill that out afterwards.
You know where I live too,
Yeah, we're getting ready to go home.
right? The mayor asked earlier, he said, what, you didn't have anything better to do tonight? And, honestly, I'm here to just be supportive of council and commissioners that are working towards helping us. I live in Saguaro West. And, when the renaming from commercial buffer to whatever you want to name it to, you're right. We hear buffer and we do expect a little bit of a buffer to help us maintain our desert rural lifestyle. When you talk about health, safety, and well-being, when I look out my door, part of my well-being is not looking at a sea of what's coming or what is potentially coming. And, the idea of designated historic sites or recognized neighborhoods, I fall into that. And I know that there are, when you talk about historic things, there's things like historic buffers. And as this whole process evolves, I hope everybody will take into mind that, there are things that are within your control to help us preserve the lifestyle that we manage to live south of Carefree Highway and not in the town core. So I thank you for your time and I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you. With that, is there a motion to adjourn? From second,
Second.
all's in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, Steve, for being with us.